Welcome to the show. It's Fishing with in the Hoods with the Urban Dragon. I fish a lot of urban areas here in my region and some of the worst cesspools on the planet where most 99% of people believe there's no fish in it. I hunt everything from giant muskies to walleyes, largemouth, smallmouth, carp, suckers, catfish, all of your typical species, panfish of different sorts, and that sort of thing like that. I do multi-testing with Temu and dollar store like products and things like that. Also, bring out really old fashioned rods and reels. Use all kinds of techniques that a lot of people are claiming are new that are actually really old. I bet most of these techniques, like drop shotting stuff, I was already doing the 60s, right? And there's people before me doing these kinds of things, right? The only difference is that a lot of people were doing them for strange reasons, not like the more advanced way of how you're thinking about it nowadays, sort of thing like that. I cover bait casters, spinning, fly fishing, multi species, and that sort of thing like that. And every week it could be different. We did have trouble with Temu cameras. A lot of them would bust off. Sometimes we'd have 20, 25 fish on the camera and the clip would bust off. So be very careful. Any of these kind of cameras that you get from Temu, they make real shitty clips that'll bust off. So I figured out ways of fixing that, some of the video problems and that. So, and I've gotten better quality ones as I went along, testing different ones. And so as the series progresses, the videos get better and that sort of thing for clarity and all that sort of thing like that. So it could be anything across the board from hunting giant carp to giant smallmouth bass, whatever it is, fly fishing, all kinds of stuff. So hopefully you like and subscribe. I was stuck 2 seasons in a row trying to do this and had a relapse, couldn't even walk and that, and built myself back up so that I could cast just as well as any famous legend in the business and battlefish and that sort of thing like that. I do very tough shows. One of the main bodies of water that I test is loaded full of dead debris top to bottom. So even the most weedless lures on earth will collect weeds and that sort of thing like that. Thousands of boats going by all the time, piles of traffic, millions of pounds of garbage being thrown in it. The crystal clear water, the fish can see everything a dime down in the bottom. It can be a very tough place, right? So I astound a lot of people, especially I do like these Canada Day challenges. You'll really enjoy that one. It's a wild muskie show, and I gotta catch muskies in 5 feet or less of water with hundreds of boats going by, crystal clear water, garbage loaded from top to bottom, screaming at people, alcoholics throwing in their booze, and you name it, right? Crackheads walking around. It's a wild scene, right? But I got some great film. The last one that we did, we got some real cutie pies. So if you like the ladies there, that sort of thing like that, I have some a break where I went for coffee at lunch to start on the other side of the system, and I got some incredible sort of fun films there that are pretty entertaining and that sort of thing like that. So I got a lot of different shows coming up of all kinds of different species and different things like that. So I like and click like and subscribe and that sort of thing like that, and hopefully it will, even whether you're the most amateur of angler to you know, the Kevin Van Dams out there. Every person can learn something from me. I've been doing this since the 60s around the clock. I live on bodies of water where it's over 100 species available to me, and I would fish for them around the clock, chase them different ones throughout the day, just changing tactics and things like that. So you see that on a lot of my shows, and that I do a lot of strange shows. I hunt monster walleyes all the time with spinner baits or strange giant jerk baits and all kinds of things that are not known to be walleye baits and things like that, and catch monsters with them and all kinds of stuff, but different kind of patterns that I use that are very unusual that you won't see typically out there and that sort of thing like that. So hopefully you enjoy the show. Stay tuned. So we're into one here, folks, sort of thing. Sadly, something went wrong with the sound quality of it and that sort of thing like this on this particular one here. This older fellow here is amazed by how light of line I'm using. So he's being fully amused and he's shocked by the size of the big fish that are in this little pond, right? So I'm not sure if he was a tourist or not, but anyways, we're scrapping along here and that sort of thing like that. A lot of these I had to cut off at a certain point because I was worried we're running out of film and that sort of thing. But you can see them here, and I'm using this little sort of spinning reel. That reminds me of my Alcedo Micron spinning reel and a 1970s float rod, right? A matchstick, right? Anyways, so we're just about to let her go here, so we'll continue on. So, folks, here we got set up, and I just got some basic carp things that I'm going to show you. And that now here, I already came up with this in the late 60s, okay? And if you see any difference between this rig here, can you see the tiny hook here? I use typically a lot smaller. I would also cover this up completely with particle baits, sometimes the hook as well, and thread it up that way. I also would pop them up off the bottom with pieces of sponge or blown up crawlers, right? I already won tournaments here in the region. Now here's the hair rig, right? It is extremely difficult to film these things for some reason, right? So anyway, let's see here. Okay, so here's a typical hair rig. You can see down at the bottom there, if you can see that, there's a little loop there, and you put like a boilie stopper. I use just twist ties and cut it to a little small piece, bend it in half, and put it in this loop here, and then pull up, and it'll tighten right up into it, right? But if you see, there really is no difference here. It's just simply that the English started using bait needles and things like this, okay, and this one has a screw for boilies, so you can screw through here to feed that through, and then the other has a little hook on it up at the top there that you can thread particle baits or boilies or what have you, right, and once you've screwed it through and that sort of thing like that. But this is how they would do it, but simply I was just threading it up here. Sometimes I'd cover that with a dough ball as well, mix harder baits and softer, cover the whole thing. I was doing it more for the size of the bait to attract larger sort of fish, because a lot of times I'd run out of certain sizes of hooks, and I had these early English hooks from the 60s on a place in Spark Street that I would use for minnows. I realized that you could actually land Titanic carp with them if you were careful and things like that. So here's some other sort of things that it would be useful for you. Of course, pliers. These are float stops and that sort of thing like that. Here's a little feeder from Temu and that sort of thing. I make my own little floats. These are fake particle baits here, that sort of thing like that. Lots of different hooks from Temu. These Hersey and different ones that we'll try and that sort of thing like that. Tubing and that for making certain rigs and things like that. So I cover everything from boat rigs, all this kind of stuff. But in here, we won't be doing this whatsoever, no boat rigs. We're using, here is a traditional way of doing it with 2 bank sticks. You can see here, like this, and we're testing this Temu feeder rod from Sugaling. I've already landed all kinds of fish with it. Something just poked at that, so maybe we're getting our first bite here. Actually, I might have to shut off the camera. So here, sadly, most of the bite alarms that they make nowadays have the wheels on them, which are not good for slack line approach. What happens, the line is going up in here, and it doesn't really touch the wheel. The old-fashioned kind with the big wire on them that used in the 70s and stuff like that, they were much better for slackline approach. These are bank sticks. You can adjust them to different heights. You can use just one and fork it up, like for catfish and that kind of things. But in this situation, we have it like this with the 2 of them.
This is an old Gardner bank stick from over 40 years old, so a long time in a galaxy far, far away, and that sort of thing like that. I'm using a cheap bank stick from a tripod that I show in another show, and that sort of thing like that. And on this one here, no bite alarm in that. We're using a microscopic floats. I've been using everything from shish kebab floats to all kinds of different things, toothpicks, all kinds of stuff since the 60s. Because a lot of times the carp would start being picky, and I'm just watching the tiniest little movement, and then I'm right there on them, and I can get them, right? Way better than the bolt rig methodology a lot of times, and this sort of thing like that. If it's windy, you can prop this down and put the rod tip in the water and sink a barrier line so that the garbage isn't crossing across it and things like that, and you can adjust these, right? I'll show you a tripod where you can put like 3, 4, 5 rods depending on how big the bar is and that sort of thing and how many sections that it has. What else here? We're chucking particle baits, and we're using, today, I use a lot of old containers from ice cream or different things to hold this. We're using a chum and paste bait sort of thing that's peach and sort of a licorice mixture. There's no such thing as magic baits. Everybody asks, and my uncle has a Kiko Man formula, and all this stuff is BS. After you catch so many carp on any kind of bait that you're using, I've seen them bold in fear from if you throw out corn or peas or different chickpeas, things like that. Once they've been hooked so many times, they'll start avoiding certain kinds of smells and foods, and you have to change the formulas all the time. There's piles of people in England with misinformation that sell you magic tutti frutti and all this stuff, but all these things will only last so long. You have to change your formulas. I've been doing this since the 60s. My mother would be so upset I'd steal all of her arrowroot flour, any kind of flour on this planet, that sort of thing like that, making these paste baits and that. It may rain later. This is one of these funny days where it'll be sunny and rainy and that sort of thing like that. The debris and stuff gets washed in here, and they just filled it, so it hasn't been that long and that sort of thing like that. So I don't know how many carp are in here, but one seemingly jumped over there. So eventually they'll find the bait. The problem is at this time of year, this ends of bodies of water are great areas for carp typically, or like at dams or places like that, because they filter and then all of a sudden it's the end, right? They can't go any further, and there might be garbage and stuff like here where the wind blew all this stuff. And look at the polluters there. They throw in so much garbage in these places, right? It's terrible. But in historic times before the zebra mussels come, I can catch over 100 in this pond in a day's time, right? But nowadays, a real good day is like 20 or, that sort of range, right? So there's way less fish available than what there used to be, right? And that sort of thing like that. And just like salmon or any other kinds of species, since this pond's ever been here, I've observed the same ones coming through the pond, spawning around the same time in exactly pretty well the same area that they were born, right? So multi-species of fish do this, and scientists are just starting to find this out a little bit, right? But I mean, this is old news if you actually were observant, right? I would see this and realize that this can't be the case, right? I've noticed this with just about a vast majority of species of fish. They seem to all, wherever they were born or the time of year that they were born, they'll come back and spawn around the same time and things like that, and in the same sorts of areas unless something stopped them and they have to relocate somehow, right? And that sort of thing like that. So, but anyways, we got our work cut out for us, but at least it's a nice day so far and that sort of thing like that. Watch for dead debris. You can see here I grabbed the float, so I'll have to move that in a second. So anyways, we'll wait for our first fish here. We'll be testing. We're just doing very simple here, small microscopic bite indicators at shallow water, 4 and 6 pound test line, with these little bite indicators, and one of them there later we'll test with the paste baits, and that we're going to use paste baits and simple particle baits and that for this show. So stay tuned. things working this time. The last time the button was up higher than what it's supposed to be and probably didn't pick up much of a fight here. But anyways, we've got it, this tiny little, this is a Piggly Davies rod from the 70s. I got 4-pound line and this microscopic little aceto-like micron spinning reel that I still can't see the name of this thing. But anyways, you'll recognize it from Temu. It's got a longer handle there and that. And unlike some of them, even the cover comes off, at least it still holds in there, right? So it passes as far as I'm concerned. Like I've already landed some bigger fish with it, a different species, but this is, I can't remember if I already did one carp with this or not, but this is 4-pound line. There's brush and snags all over the place and that, and this fish is completely across the pond and that sort of thing like that. And it took a while to get them chummed in now, but this is the second one. The first one messed up here. But so it's been an hour and about 2 fish. You can see there, I don't know. Hopefully this thing is picking it up this time like last time here, right? So it's very hard to guess exactly where all of the, camera's going to get, right? I wish they made them bigger for sure that, the whole area is going to be covered, right? And that sort of thing like that. So again, I don't use nets, but maybe I'll get some volunteer here one time and we'll teach you how to properly net and things like that. But you can see the fish up there. He's getting up towards the surface and that sort of thing like that. The water is cold, so they don't bite as long. And I can get away with this lighter sort of line, even invisible thread like stuff, right? So anybody that tells you they break off and with 60, 80-pound ray, like I said, right, it's ridiculous. He's just not fighting the fish properly, right? So you can see the little small float indicator there, right? And I make them out of everything from shish kebab floats to balsa wood, toothpicks, all kinds of things, right? And I've been doing that since the 60s. I wrote some article. I didn't realize that it was actually out on the internet. I thought it was just like a private page, and I hadn't really edited or anything. But I had over 25,000 views of it, that sort of thing like that, teaching these kinds of things about carp. Then all of a sudden these kids started making videos with DVDs and all this, claiming they created this, right? Like completely silly, right? So a lot of information I already passed on there. There was a famous carp angler in England, and I put this rig where I was using my mother's old sort of like stocking like stuff and things like that to keep the dough ball in there and that, and all of a sudden this guy puts his name on it, right, on this sort of thing, right? So I mean, it's astonishing to me how there's a lot of misinformation about where a lot of things came from in fishing that, others have taken credit for that really people were doing it before them, right? That sort of thing like that. So we got this one here. She's pretty well tired out and that sort of thing like that. Sometimes I'll break the little hook. I'm using a very microscopic size hook here and that sort of thing like that. And from Temu, little salmon hook, I think it was about a size 10 or 12 or something like that. Because it's cold frontal conditions, the fish are picky and that sort of thing like that. So we'll let her go though in a second. And what I'm gonna, sometimes I use slip floats so that I make homemade ones out of toothpicks and things like that. Out of the ear sort of cleaners, sort of thing. Ones that are hollow, right? And they're plastic and that, and then I can find beads that'll fit them, and they make wonderful little slip floats, and then I have some bobber stops and that sort of thing like that. So if I need the bait to slide down all the way, the problem with these long rods is once you get it to a certain point now, if I try and grab that line, that's why sometimes I'll use trace material like, spider wire ones like that sort of thing as a leader, so I can grab it at the end and bring it in, but the main line is only 4 or 6 or whatever it is, right? And that sort of thing. So, a lot of professionals, they rush these guys in. They don't understand how to properly play fish, right?
Today's pattern was pretty simple. There, we did a few sorts of things. Here's a basic drawing. Sadly, I've tried many times with filming with the hats, and quite often it'll cut out a little part of the objects I'm trying to show you and things like that, and that sort of thing like that. So here's just an easy, basic, simple drawing here of what we're doing here. I'm using sizes 18 to size 2, like bait holder, like sort of hooks like that. Salmon egg like hooks will work. Many kinds, but a typical bait holder hook. Sort of thing like that. Make sure they're sharp and that sort of thing, and not brittle ones that easily bend. Like forged is even better if you can find them, and that sort of thing like that. Now, in this case, I use two different sorts of float methodologies here. One of them is go to a dollar store and for Q-tips and that sort of thing like that, any kind of companies will do here. They make two kinds. They have ones that are like paper, that are like a stiffer cardboard like sort of thing. And then they have these plastic ones. It's the plastic ones you want. When you cut them, they're hollow inside, right? Okay, and that sort of thing like that. So you can use that as the base, as the slip float like device. You can get it at Temu, bobber stoppers, ones like that. You could use tiny, small elastics in the dollar store, like I'm doing over here, with shish kebab floats and that sort of thing like that. Pieces of balsa wood. If you have no floats with you, you can create some, just find a twig, make them quite small, where just barely they can hold the bait here, like below, where almost they can just pull down to nothing, right? This is what you want, unless it's like really windy or different conditions. We'll cover those other times and that sort of thing like that. So here's the rig that I came up with in the later 60s called a mini maxi rig. And you can see here what I would use is usually invisible thread, 2 4 pound line most of the time, or six, depending on, the size of the tiny little English hooks I'd be using, right? And that sort of thing like that. So instead of the methodology that Kevin Maddox came up with later here, that we'll show on the right, and that sort of thing like that, you'd simply thread the sort of bait up the tiny little hook here and cover that. I quite often will cover the sort of hook as well, and it increases the profile of it. And quite often you might hook them on the tiny little hook, whilst with this hair rig methodology, you don't get that second chance, right? And that sort of thing like that. Now, what you do is, let's say, elastic or one of these bobber stops like that, you figure out the depth that you need to have the bait just barely sitting on the bottom of the float there. Sometimes they'll sink the float to watch it go left or right if they're being real picky and that sort of thing like that. You stand right over the rod, and even if it's hours here, you have to have this kind of patience to be able to do that kind of technique, but you'll catch at least the fish that are hitting around it, right? Keep an eye out also if you see your line twitching all the time or getting these beeps. It may be that they're not feeding on your bait at all and ignoring it, or B, they haven't found it yet, but their tails and things like that are bumping into the line and giving you this false indications. And you'll run across this with floats sometimes. You'll see the float starting to go, but actually the guy doesn't have it at all. He just got stuck into the line a little bit and moved it a few feet, right? And that sort of thing like that, right? So you can see here another way of doing it is then instead of the hair rig like principle here, where you got this real light line, and the idea, the problem with all these hair rigs that they tie nowadays are really not a hair rig at all, because the idea here is for the fish to get it in his mouth without him feeling it at all, and that sort of thing like that, and then just suck up the whole thing, right? And then poof, oh, now this big free hook here, when he goes to turn around, it'll nail him, especially for using boat rigs and things like that, right? But the idea was is that the trace material here to the boilies sort of thing, or particle base or whatever you were using, right? The idea for it was is that he's supposed to be nibbling down on that and not feeling that, and then finally suck it up. But almost any hair rigs you see, they don't use actually light line as a trace material at all, completely defeating the purpose of it. Simply now you're putting a boilie on it. When this guy feeds over it, he feels that, right? So what I do then is that sort of thing is I'll usually cover the trace material if I'm making like a typical like hair rig with a loop and that sort of thing like that, and a boil bait here, and you need a screw, right? Like a small sort of a bit driver that you can find. You can even make one easily by going to a dollar store and they got like different size drill bits. You just want one small, and then you could melt that into some broken old handle, crazy glue it in there, and that. Now you've created a bait boilie drill, right? So all you got to do is you screw through the sort of whatever boilies that you made, right? So you make a clean, nice hole. Then you can feed it up here. As you can see, you use like a needle, right? And you see at the end there that you make like a little loop, right? Okay, on the needle you can thread your particle baits. It could be these boilies here, any kind of thing like this, right? And you thread it onto this needle and then get that into that loop there and push it up with your hand, right? And then it will slide over the loop and then fill up this area, right? This is a typical way you would do like a hair rig and that sort of thing like that, right? So we use that method, but also for like a harder boilies, but also use like softer paste bait. Today, almost all the fish came off of these two here, and that was just simply using small shish kebab floats there is just more as a bite indicator, and that you could use floating silly putty back in when I was a little kid and stuff like that. A lot of times when they first came out with these styrofoam like cups and things like that, these little pieces would work well. I'd use pieces of tiny cork from winos bottles that I'd find on the ground, anything like that. So anything at all that you could either wrap some kind of little elastic and make like a float like that way, or even wrap it, cut like a little cuts around it, and then wrap the line on it so many times around and you pull it tight, it will hold in there. It does weaken the line a little bit. It may like because you're wrapping it tight like that and pulling on it and stuff, it might, do a little bits of things to it. But what happens is when you set the hook, the what will happen is that the little piece of cork and that, and because it's cork and natural, it's not polluting the environment, it'll just sort of break free as you're fighting the fish, right? It'll pop back out loose and you just make another one. And then you use like a larger bait holder hook here to start off with, typically, and then you might have to downsize them or up the size of the bait, right? And that sort of thing like that. You can cover fully it with a dough paste bait like we were using today, or you can have if you're missing fish and stuff like that, if the line you have is light and you're not setting the hook into them or the bait's a bit too firm, whatever the reason, right, and that sort of thing like that, what you can do is just mold the base bait around it, keep the sort of bend of the hook out at the point and that sort of thing, the barb that it'll be sticking out, and you can cover that with a piece of worm, pieces of crab dinner, particle baits, anything like that, a mixture, combination of the two, or just even leave it open. But you'll lose a few fish because sometimes when they feel this, and this is why hair rigs are not as successful as what people think they are. A lot of times this fish has nibbled on your bait many times and felt that hook around there and doesn't like it. I also suspect that they can actually smell it. If you smell metal hooks or anything when they come out, I can actually smell this weird metallic like smell, right? Some people are more sensitive to others. So I presume under the water that they may actually do this, right? And that sort of thing like that. So that's another reason a lot of times, even with a bolt rig, I may cover a certain portion of the sort of larger hair rig sort of hook, right? And that sort of thing like that. So all depends on the size of carp that you're hunting. For sure, don't use thin wire that you would use maybe get away with on walleyes and that sort of thing like this. These are tough dudes, right? And they may make astonishing runs and all this kind of stuff. So, you know, all that sort of stuff, right? So it's important that you know realize that if you have big carp in your sort of areas and that sort of thing like that, make sure that you're using a bit more solid quality sort of hooks here, right? And you can get these small English hooks. They're usually made for fly fishing and things like that, sort of to make little tiny nets and that sort of stuff. They're quite strong, some of them. And the thing is when you're first fighting these fish, if you are going to use the way the rigs that I would do it over compared to typical hair rigs and that sort of thing like that, then remember that when you're first fighting this guy, you may have him on this very thin line here, and it wouldn't take much for him to snap it, right? So, and the thing is that you got to be really careful and have appropriate gear for this. But once you see when you've fought him for a while, if you see that it's on the bigger hook that's, you know, somewhere in his lip or whatever, right? Well, now you can pump it up because your main material line here is more stronger, whatever you're using, right? Again, I don't use braids. I'm totally astonished by there's people on TV and these are very poor fighting anglers. Like they're not good at all, right? And that sort of thing. And they're using Titanic lines here that are way overkill for the poor fishy and that sort of thing like that. So I'm just not a fan of these sort of things. It's way overkill. And if you can't land fish on, you know, big fish on lighter line, then you need to learn and get better at it. That's all, right? Simple as that, right? And that sort of thing like that. So, but the main two patterns that we use today is that you could take any kind of size, like shish kebab float, toothpicks, get yourself even a dollar store. Sometimes they sell them a brick of balsa wood and that, and shave down like tiny little float size shapes, right? And that sort of stuff. And so you don't have to be as fancy. Like over in England, they make them in drams, you know, that'll pull down at a certain little thing, because they have these match like contests for, yeah, you know, small little minnow like sort of fish, right? And that sort of thing like that, a multi of species. And big tournaments sometimes can be won by like not even a tenth of an ounce difference, right? And that sort of thing like that. So pretty entertaining, right? Like a different sort of thing. And it's a whole skill in itself, right? And these guys will use an armada floats, right? And that sort of thing for each little condition and that. But our North American fish artists, I mean, there isn't 10 million of me floating around casting in every little pool out there, right? So that sort of thing like that. But over in the English places, these they make them into pegs, right, and that sort of thing like that. So each one they'll draw peg 1, 2, 3, 4, and you might have bad luck and be on a shitty peg, right, where there's not much fish in there. So you got to lead these guys in. So it's a whole skill, different science in itself, right? And these guys will use like cane pole like sort of stuff going here, and different match sticks and different you know float rods and these kinds of things, right, and that sort of stuff like that. So but as long as you get between, I've used way smaller than this and of course much larger than these, right? But if you stay in those ranges, a vast majority of fish you'll be able to, you know, get in if you're using a better quality sort of hook like that and that sort of thing like that. And if you want these popped up off the bottom, you can use pieces of sponge. At the end, like after you've thread this on, like let's say you were using particle baits, if you use a tiny piece of worm where legal, you know, may or may not be, that sort of thing like that, if you shoot air inside of that, get an old needle from a diabetic or whatever, or if they legally allow you to purchase it in the area, whatever, right? You can use different things. There is one worm blowers that are made, but I haven't seen one of them sold in years in a shop. So the fad went out at the time, right, ages ago, and that sort of stuff like that. But I mean, it may still be available, right, and that sort of thing like that. But you could use that. I have an old one still laying around somewhere. I just never lost it, right? But usually any kind of needle you could use, right, and that sort of thing like that. That is small. You blow blow a little bit of air into the head of a crawler, right, and put that on that tiny hook and cover it there. That will float it right up off the bottom with some particle baits and that. Unless they're real heavy dudes like chickpeas, some of them a bit harder to do, and that. So you might want to use like a small little even piece of wooden peg float, like a wooden beads of different sort. I've used that as long as it's a bit thinner than the bait that you're going to be using. They'll tend to feel the bait of that, and because it's natural sort of thing and hard, they might decide to crush it and spit it out after and suck the whole thing down. So sometimes you'll see the float go real fast and that sort of thing like that. So in this case, I was using two different methodologies here at the same time, where I have a slip float like variety that you could use, right, where I can put it back to the same sort of depths like that. I also suggest once you get a magic bite sort of radius there, every time you should retie these. If you're using like lining like this and that sort of thing like that, you may lose the area that you were at. So if you mark it with a black marker pretty well roughly where you were, right, when you first get your first hit, adjusting the slip float back and forth, they're real easy to put on. You just thread your line through this bead, you push the bead up, and it'll get on there, and then you can start pulling it up to the depth that you need it. And like I said, you could use elastics. If you're really desperate, you can even tie thread around it a few times and that sort of thing like that, and make a couple of knots, and it'll do like a if you're desperate, right? And that sort of thing like that. So basically, this is what we were using today. Very simple approaches here. Later, we'll be doing more of this hair rig leg sort of stuff here with some regular boilies there and the bolt rig sort of ways of doing things and that. But in this particular one and the next one that we'll be doing, it's more these kinds of methodologies. Maybe the next show there we'll have some fly fishing in for them as well. So anyways, that covers your basic sort of thing here that you'll need a lot of times and that sort of thing like that. In other shows, I may be, if the current's there a little bit, we may be using like slip sinkers and a similar like approach and that sort of thing like that. So different ways of many thousands of ways of doing things, right? But these basic ones here will catch you carp most of the time, right? So we'll continue on.
So there, folks, there's a pretty decent one for the pondy. Oh, now let's hook around her dorsal fin here there for a second. Anyways, we'll let her go here. I'm just showing you. There we go. So anyways, it's getting sunny again. So it's a weird day. It's rain, sunny, back and forth every second. Okay, stay tuned. So there, folks, there's another one. We're scrapping away. 4-pound test line on a fly rod, sort of entertaining. So there you go. So we'll let her go in a second. There's another one. So folks, we're into another one here. It's he's just scrapping away. It's fun on 2 and 4 pound test line and stuff like this. I'm used to hunt giants most of the time, but in this ponds and stuff, the fish are mostly smaller sort of things, right? It's you can see the pipe system. In the old days, it used to be not full of zebra mussels and weird stuff, so a bit of bigger carp could get through it. But a lot of that sludge has gotten in there, so certain sizes have a hard time pushing their way through there. But anyways, we'll let this sucker go here in a second, but it's tiring out. And you can see that there's definitely still fish around. It's unfortunate with our pollution and stuff like that. We got to do something about it or there won't be anything. Stay tuned.
I used a couple of formulas here, but I'll show you the first one. I'll cover them in different shows. But here's a real basic one that you could get your young kid. I started making these things at 4 years of age, right? That sort of thing, like that, experimenting every day and that sort of thing with different formulas, insanely peeving off my mother and the old man there, sneaking all their different sorts of flowers or whatever they had. I'd try anything from saffron, you name it. I tried zillions of things, right? And that sort of thing like that. So here's a real basic sort of thing like that. Whatever you can get a pound, half a pound, if it goes in kilo, whatever, like any kind of big bag there that you can, like, get, and you'll always have some spare and things like that, and that sort of thing like that. It can be anything from like semolina sort of wheat, like that, any kind of flour, whole wheat, all purpose, any of those, right? That sort of thing like that, because they're more like the base to hold the scent and all the other things what you really want. And also, I'd always suggest too, if you're having trouble sticking the formula, whatever you're using, that you get some rice and arrowroot flour, right? And that sort of thing like that. These two stick really well, help bind a bait quite good, and that sort of thing like that. You can take a bowl there, like a pot, right, and just boil like a pot of water, sort of thing like that. And then just have some kind of small mixing bowl or whatever, right? And that sort of thing like that, and just pour that in. It's better if you want your bait stiffer and to consistently stick better in a lot of things. It's better that you boil it at first, right? Or at least make it like fairly warm and that sort of thing like that, and it will help it better. But you can certainly do it with the river water, even if you bring this kinds of material with you. You can make it right on the fly. I've had to before, and that sort of thing, because the formulas that I tried weren't working out, but I keep some backups and using some standard ones that will work, as long as you don't keep using the same formula constantly, right? Then eventually they'll get used to it, right? But here's a real simple one here. So after, all you do there is get like some kind of measuring cup, right? Like I just do it by eye, but let's say like it's like about a quarter of a cup in a measuring cup, right? You just pour like 1 glass or of boiled, non-boiled water, whatever you have available, right, into the mixing bowl, and then a quarter cup of this flour, and just keep stirring and stirring and that, till you start getting like a sort of a consistency of that you can roll it in your hand without like fully sticking to you or anything like that, and that sort of thing. And then at this point, then you want to mash this up with like 1 scoop of butterscotch ice cream. If you don't have that, the topping will work, anything like that, or any kind of weird butterscotch that is that you could, that is liquidy more, and that sort of thing like that, so you can mix in the bait well, right? And that sort of thing like that. Put that in, and you just stir it around there. Keep pouring a quarter of a cup until you get this consistency again, like that. When you take it out, if you once you get the shape that you're able to shape this into balls and different things, right? Because you may want to turn these into boilies as well. You could do it that way, right? And we'll cover that another show and that sort of thing like that. But this is just for paste baits and that sort of thing like that. And at that point, once you get that, and if you're still having a trouble sticking, then again, adding a quarter cup of rice or arrowroot flour, or any kinds of to get it a little bit more sweeter and that sort of thing like that, help it stick a little bit better. Any kind of like corn syrup, a regular, white or brown sugar, that sort of thing like that, coconut sugar, stevia, ones like that, right? Like any kind of thing of those sorts. You don't want to overblast it, right? But like, I mean, if you want it a little bit sweeter and help it stick better, adding small amounts of this at a time, right, until you get this consistency you want, right? And that sort of thing like that. So it's pretty simple. And then get it in a bag, and then start using, steal your wipe or a piece of Big Chef Boyardee sculptor roller there, right? And just start rolling that flat and that sort of thing, and mixing it all together really well. If you can't go fishing, let's say for a week or whatever it is, you can keep it in the freezer there. But I'd take it out the night before. Make sure it's a Ziploc bag. You might have reeky stuff in your fridge, onions, all these kinds of things. So absorb into that and destroy your bait, and you'll think, oh, the fish aren't biting when maybe they're eating like crazy, but they're not touching your crap, right? Because it now stinks, right? Maybe a catfish will grab it and that sort of stuff. Those guys will eat anything moving, right? That sort of stuff. So we'll be covering shows on them as well. I want to do that soon there. I haven't went in a while, right? And I enjoy fishing monster channel catfish and things like that. And we're already missing some of the big mooses there and that sort of thing like that, because they'll be spawned out and that sort of thing like that. But there's still there's in my region there's some real old monsters that are mixed in. But the problem is, the same holes that you'll find a 30-pound plus monster is the same hole that you're going to find 102-pound monsters, right? Mini monsters, right? So this Ottawa River is loaded full of catfish, right? Like, even with the zebra mussel infestation, they still eating up and moving everything going, right? Because they have some pretty good defense there, right? Largemouth eat the muskies. I've seen spit them out too, and they were successful in killing them and crushing them. And smallmouth, even smaller ones and sort of things like that. I've seen them pretty well about most species. Even a walleye cop went up once. So I pretty well across the board, they'll use these as a prey. But these guys, that they get their spine in there, and that's why a lot of people don't realize why bass will jump, especially largemouth. Smallmouth are weird. They don't really usually do that as much, but largemouth will try and take on something bigger than quite often his mouth has even abilities to do, right? And if they get a sunfish in there, and then let's say it's a bluegill, and then it sticks up its dorsal fin area and everything, their spines in there, it gets lodged in. Now this guy's going to start choking. So they'll try and dislodge them and jump up out of the air. So it's a natural behavior for them to do that. And the same sting that when a hook goes into their mouth is the same feeling they get all the time when they crush down on the sunfish or spiny ones like bullheads and these kinds of ones, right? They'll get this sort of stuff. So this is why they behave in the same kind of fashion, right? And because you can let them go, and most of the spots you're going to hook them, they're not going to bleed or anything like that, right? You can keep catching, releasing the same kinds of species, from carp to whatever it is, right? If you're careful and that sort of thing like that. So, but so we'll cover that on other shows and that sort of thing like that. But if you stick with a basic formula like this, right, then this is all you'll need to catch big carp in any kinds of bodies of water that you fish. After a certain amount, then that they're going to start turning off from it and get used to it, right? So we'll cover some more different formulas and different things like that. And I'll teach you how to numerous different ways to make some boilies, pop-up boilies, and things like that. If you're making boilies that you want to sink better, it's better to add some lean in it. It's a heavier sort of thing. So even if you use it in a microwave, you can still have it as a sinker and that sort of thing like that. But if you want it to float, then don't use ones like semolina. Use lighter sorts of flours, right? But I'll cover all that in the next sort of one. But this is a basic one. You can wrap paste bait, like I said, around, completely pulley the hook, leave the sort of the gap and the barb and the point out if you need to. You can put particle baits to cover it a little bit and that sort of thing like that. And all of these will work to a certain degree, right? But the less he feels that hook, the better, right? Sort of thing like that. So, and that's one of the problems with hair rigs, like I said, is that the way that they do this in today's times, most of these guys are tying 30, 40-pound braid and different things. This is not, when the guy mouths it in, he's feeling that on the other side and knows there's something wrong, right? I've watched them doing it. Done a lot of tests in that. And like I said, the original reason that Kevin Maddox independently came up with a similar like ideas I was already doing here, but it's the same kind of idea. It's just a different way of doing it, and that sort of thing like that. But the thing is originally it's for your light line so that he's not feeling this in his mouth, right? But all these herrings that they die are totally not like this, right? So, well, it's one of those things there, right, where that sort of thing like that, and that's why I'm not as fan as much of boilies in certain situations, especially in this North American market. There isn't 10 million of meat floating around. A lot of people post carp videos and stuff like that, but a lot of these are small, yeah, sort of fish and that sort of thing like that, and most of them are just one or two, right? These guys aren't catching 10 million of sort of thing, right? Because they do follow a lot of the English like practices, right? That are not as effective in this country, right? And that sort of thing like that. So, anyways, we'll continue on, but that's a basic formula you can use anywhere and be ready to catch some monsters.
So there's another one, folks. It's scrapping away here. Now I'm using an alternative tactic right now. I'm actually using a fly rod, and I'm using very, very small microscopic hooks in the size 20, so they're so tiny, but this is a cold front's going on, and after a few fish at first, then nothing was hitting much after that, so I have to change tactics to get them to go. So there you go, but for all the people that think there's no fish in here and all this kind of stuff, there's all kinds of them if you know what you're doing. So anyway, stay tuned. We'll land this one here in a second, and then she's getting tired out there. You can't even see the hook, it's so tiny. It's out there, it's right in the corner. Okay, stay tuned. So folks, we're into another one there. It's cold parental conditions, but they're here. So anyways, I'm getting them with a slack line approach, small particle like step, and here we go. I don't know what's going on here, if we can see this for sure. These cameras are wild. Anyways, stay tuned. We'll let this one go here in a second. So there, folks, there's a pretty decent one for the pondy. Oh, now let's hook around her dorsal fin here there for a second. Anyways, we'll let her go here. Just showing you there we go. So anyways, it's getting sunny again. So it's a weird day. It's rain, sunny, back and forth every second. Okay, stay tuned.
Opsis there, I covered some of the basics, some basic rigs for you for some carp and that sort of thing like that. Showed you the pond. We're going to continue this on. There was a lot more fish caught and that sort of thing over a Saturday and a Sunday in the area. Then I do some sewing thread challenge and we'll move to another pond in that. And then I'll put another one out hunting more for bigger monsters and that sort of thing like that. And fly fishing for them in different ones as we go along. I showed you the sort of some basics of carp, and each time that I'll do different ones, we'll cover some different sort of things and that. Like even if I do a fly fishing show, I still may give you some kind of maze formula or different things, right? So and show you some different ways of different bite indicators and all kinds of different ways of doing things, right? So anyways, hopefully you enjoy. Click like and subscribe, and again, please keep our waters clean, or these poor cute sexy mermaids here, they're going to turn green like the poor lady in the canal from the pollution, right? So and that sort of thing like that. So I mean, keep that in mind, right? Sort of that it's important sort of a thing here that we all do this, and here this has been I wear the magic ring of King Solomon production, a sort of thing like that. Now I'm not Jewish or sort of Islamic or any of those sorts of things like that, but I do like because I'm Irish and Scottish mostly. I like magic charms and things like that. And I also love history, and it seems that so many cultures and people mention this ring and this mighty 7 star, sort of the sign of God, right, and that sort of thing like that. So I mean, I would consider that fairly on the sort of yeah, it seems to have a historic background, and how do I know, right? So, anyways, I enjoy magic sort of things, from lucky bracelets. Sometimes I'll have a watch on, then I'll switch it to a lion's head or a dragon's head, and I have lucky charms of 4 leaf clovers. I just like all this stuff. Whether it has any real relevance or not, I have no idea. But it keeps me in a good mood, and you know what I mean? Well, why not, right? And that sort of thing like that. So, but anyways, all I know is historically, a lot of people mention this ring, and it seems to have fact and that sort of thing too. So how do I know? So, anyways, hopefully, click like and subscribe and enjoy. Thanks for watching.